I was 3 rows deep in my apple orchard, pruning shears in hand, when I heard the telltale click of expensive heels on gravel. Living in Riverside, California, you get used to certain sounds, and that particular rhythm meant only one thing. Trouble was coming my way in the form of a middle-aged woman with too much time and not enough common sense. "Excuse me," the voice called out, dripping with false politeness. "You cannot be out here right now." I turned around slowly, wiping sweat from my forehead with the back of my hand. The August sun was brutal, and I had been working since 6 in the morning. Standing at the edge of my property was a woman I recognized from the neighborhood meetings I religiously avoided. She wore a cream-colored pantsuit despite the 90-degree heat, her blonde hair styled in that aggressive bob that screamed, "Let me speak to your manager." Her name tag, because of course she wore a name tag, read Patricia Hendricks, HOA president. "Morning," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Something I can help you with?" Patricia's lips pursed like she had bitten into one of my sour cherry trees. "This area has been designated as community green space according to the revised HOA guidelines, Section 12, Paragraph 4. All residents are required to maintain open access to communal areas between the hours of sunrise and sunset." I stared at her for a long moment, letting the absurdity of her statement sink in. "This is my orchard. I own this land. I have the deed, the property survey, and the tax bills to prove it." She pulled out a tablet from her designer handbag, scrolling through it with manicured nails painted the color of dried blood. "According to our new Community Enhancement Initiative, any green space exceeding half an acre that provides aesthetic value to the neighborhood can be reclassified for community use. Your orchard is visible from the street and clearly provides visual appeal to our neighborhood's character." "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard," I said, turning back to my trees. "This is private property, Patricia. You can't just decide it belongs to the HOA because it looks nice." "It's in the updated bylaws that were passed last month," she insisted, her voice rising an octave. "All homeowners received notice via email." I did receive that email. I had also promptly deleted it after seeing it was 47 pages long and written in the kind of legal gibberish designed to make your eyes glaze over. "My property was purchased 3 years ago, long before this particular HOA went power mad. The house came with 2 acres of land, and I had spent every spare moment and dollar transforming it into a productive orchard with apples, cherries, peaches, and pears. Let me make this crystal clear, I said, setting down my pruning shears and walking toward her. This land is mine. I don't care what your bylaws say. You have no legal right to it. Patricia's face flushed red, clashing terribly with her pantsuit. We absolutely have authority over community standards and land use. If you refuse to comply, we will be forced to issue fines. Substantial fines. Issue whatever you want, I replied. I'll see you in court. She made a huffing sound, spun on her heel with theatrical precision, and marched back toward her black Mercedes SUV parked on the street. I watched her go, already feeling the headache forming behind my eyes. I had moved to this neighborhood specifically because the house was perfect and the land had potential. The HOA had seemed like a minor annoyance at worst during the purchase process. Clearly, I had underestimated their capacity for insanity. That evening, I dug through my filing cabinet until I found my property deed and survey documents. Everything was in order. My land extended well beyond the orchard, and there was no ambiguity about the boundaries. I had even paid for an updated survey when I installed the irrigation system last year. The orchard was unquestionably, legally, and completely mine. The next morning, I woke to find an official-looking letter wedged into my front door. The HOA was fining me $500 for unauthorized restriction of community access to designated green spaces. They gave me 72 hours to comply or face additional penalties of $200 per day. I called my neighbor, Tom, who lived 2 houses down and had been in the neighborhood for 15 years. He was a retired contractor who had warned me about the HOA when I first moved in, though his warnings had focused more on their obsession with mailbox colors and lawn height. "Tom, did you know they were trying to grab people's private property now?" I asked when he picked up. He sighed heavily. "Patricia and her committee have gone completely off the rails in the last 6 months. They tried to tell the Johnsons their vegetable garden was an eyesore and needed to be removed. When that didn't work, they said it attracted rodents and was a health hazard. What happened? The Johnsons got a lawyer, and the HOA backed down. Cost them about $3,000 in legal fees, though." I thanked Tom and hung up, my mind already working through options. I could hire a lawyer, which would be expensive and time-consuming. Or I could try reasoning with the HOA board at their next meeting, though Patricia did not strike me as the reasonable type. Or, and this idea was forming slowly in my mind, I could give them exactly what they asked for in the most malicious compliance way possible. Over the next week, I ignored their letters and continued working in my orchard. Patricia drove by multiple times, slowing down to glare at me through her car window. On the 8th day, I found a certified letter in my mailbox informing me that I was now being fined $200 daily for non-compliance, and that a lien would be placed on my property if the fines were not paid within 30 days. That night, I sat on my back porch with a beer and really looked at my orchard. The trees were mature and productive. Last year, I had harvested over 3,000 pounds of fruit. Some I sold at the local farmer's market, some I gave away to friends and neighbors, and some I processed into preserves and cider. It was not just land to me. It was 3 years of early mornings, sore muscles, and the satisfaction of watching something grow under my care. But if Patricia wanted to claim it was community space, I would make it community space. I spent the weekend researching local ordinances, business licenses, and zoning laws. Riverside had specific regulations about agricultural tourism, and my property was zoned for it. I could legally operate a small farm attraction on my land, complete with admission fees, as long as I followed certain guidelines about parking, sanitation, and safety. Monday morning, I drove to the city planning office and filled out the necessary paperwork. The clerk was helpful, even enthusiastic when I explained my plan. "We love seeing more agritourism in the area," she said, stamping my applications. "It brings in visitors and supports local agriculture." Next, I visited a fencing company. I wanted something attractive but substantial. We settled on a 6-foot-high cedar fence with a locking gate. The quote was steep, but I had been saving for a new irrigation system. That could wait. The fence was installed by Friday, running the entire perimeter of my orchard with a single entrance facing the street. I commissioned a large wooden sign from a local artist who specialized in rustic farm designs. It read Riverside Heritage Orchard and Garden Experience in elegant script with smaller text below. Open daily, admission required. Patricia appeared the day the fence was completed, practically vibrating with rage. "What do you think you are doing?" she shrieked from the sidewalk. I was installing a small ticket booth near the gate, hammer in hand. "Creating community access to green space just like you wanted. The orchard is now open to the public. You cannot charge admission to community space." "Sure I can," I replied cheerfully. "This is a licensed agritourism business, completely legal. Since you insisted this needed to be accessible to the community, I figured I should do it properly." "Gotta pay for maintenance somehow." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "This is not what the bylaws intended. Maybe you should have been more specific in your 47-page document," I said, returning to my hammering. "Gates open at 9 tomorrow. Admission is $20 per person, 15 for seniors and kids under 12. She sputtered something about lawyers and drove away, her tires squealing on the asphalt. I allowed myself a satisfied smile. The fence had cost me nearly $8,000, and the business licenses and permits added another $1,500. But the look on Patricia's face was priceless. I spent that evening creating a simple website and social media pages for the orchard. I posted photos of the trees heavy with fruit, described the varieties available, and mentioned that visitors could pick their own apples and peaches for an additional fee. I kept the tone friendly and educational, emphasizing the heritage varieties I had cultivated and the sustainable practices I used. By morning, I had over 300 likes on the Facebook page and several excited comments from people asking when they could visit. I opened the gates at 9 as promised, not really expecting anyone to show up on the first day. I was wrong. A family of 4 arrived at 9:15, parents with 2 elementary school-aged kids who were thrilled at the idea of picking their own apples. I gave them baskets and a brief orientation about which trees were ready for harvest. They stayed for an hour, leaving with 20 pounds of apples and promises to tell their friends. By noon, I had hosted 8 groups and made nearly $300 in admission fees. Word was spreading fast on social media, with visitors posting photos and tagging the location. Apparently, there was substantial demand for authentic farm experiences in the Riverside area, and I was now filling that niche. Patricia returned that afternoon with 2 other women who I assumed were part of her HOA committee. One was tall and severe-looking, with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. The other was younger, maybe late 30s, wearing yoga pants and an expression of perpetual concern. "This is completely unacceptable," Patricia announced, as if I had been waiting for her judgment. "You are operating a business in a residential neighborhood. Properly zoned and licensed," I replied, showing a young couple to the peach section. "All according to city regulations." The planning office was very helpful. The severe woman stepped forward. "I'm Deborah Chen, HOA Legal Counsel. You are in violation of community standards regarding commercial activity in residential zones." "Take it up with the city," I said. "They approved everything. And technically, you're the ones who declared this community space. I'm just facilitating access." "At a cost." Patricia's voice hit a pitch that probably bothered dogs in the next county. "Lots of community spaces charge admission," I countered. "Museums, botanical gardens, nature preserves." "All community spaces, all with entrance fees. I'm following a well-established model." Deborah's eyes narrowed. "We will be seeking legal action to shut this down." "Good luck with that," I said. "And please stop harassing my visitors. You're standing in the designated customer parking area." They left, but I knew this was far from over. That evening, I received an email from the HOA's law firm demanding I cease operations immediately. I forwarded it to the lawyer I had finally decided to consult, a sharp woman named Rebecca Torres who specialized in property law and had a reputation for not backing down from bullies. Rebecca called me the next morning. "This is the most entertaining case I've seen in months," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "They have absolutely no legal ground to stand on. Your property, your business license, your permits all in order. The fact that they're the ones who started claiming it was community space makes this even better." "What should I expect?" I asked. "A lot of bluster and empty threats. They might try to leverage other HOA rules against you, so make sure you're in compliance with everything else. Keep your lawn mowed, your paint fresh, your trash cans out of sight, all that petty stuff. Don't give them any ammunition." I followed her advice religiously. My house became the most meticulously maintained property on the block. I pressure-washed the driveway, touched up the exterior paint, and made sure not even a single blade of grass exceeded the HOA's height requirements. Meanwhile, the orchard business was booming. I had visitors every day, and weekends were particularly busy. I hired Tom's grandson, a college kid named Danny who needed summer work, to help manage the crowd and keep the grounds clean. I set up a small stand selling fresh-pressed cider and homemade preserves. I added picnic tables in a shaded area where families could eat lunch. Local media picked up the story. A reporter from the Riverside Press Enterprise came out to interview me, charmed by the narrative of a small agricultural business thriving in an urban area. The article featured quotes from satisfied visitors and mentioned the orchard's educational value. It also, somewhat gleefully, mentioned the HOA dispute, painting Patricia and her committee as out-of-touch bureaucrats trying to shut down a beloved local attraction. The article was published on a Wednesday. By Friday, I had a line of people waiting when I opened the gates. Some came for the fruit, but many came because they had read the article and wanted to support a property owner standing up to an overreaching HOA. I was becoming a minor local celebrity, which was both flattering and slightly uncomfortable. Patricia's response was to double down. I received another certified letter, this time claiming that the increased traffic was a nuisance, that visitor parking was blocking neighborhood streets, and that the business was decreasing property values. They were now fining me $1,000 per week for various invented violations. Rebecca filed a motion in court for a temporary restraining order against the HOA, arguing that they were harassing me and interfering with my legal business operations. The hearing was set for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, I kept meticulous records of everything. I documented that visitor parking was confined to designated areas on my property and did not impact street access. I collected testimonials from visitors praising their experience. I even commissioned a study from a local real estate appraiser who concluded that, if anything, the orchard likely increased nearby property values by adding unique character and attraction to the neighborhood. Tom and several other neighbors provided written statements supporting me and criticizing the HOA's overreach. It turned out that Patricia had made enemies throughout the community with her increasingly authoritarian management style. People were tired of the constant fines, the nitpicking complaints, and the general atmosphere of surveillance and judgment. The court hearing arrived on a hot September morning. Rebecca and I arrived early, prepared with binders full of documentation. Patricia showed up with Deborah and a lawyer I did not recognize, a middle-aged man in an expensive suit who looked like he would rather be anywhere else. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s named Judge Mary Sullivan, reviewed both sides' arguments with obvious impatience. When Patricia's lawyer finished his presentation about community disruption and unauthorized land use changes, Judge Sullivan removed her glasses and fixed him with a withering stare. "Counsel, help me understand something," she said. "Your clients declared this man's private property to be community space without his consent, and now you're arguing that he cannot operate a legal business on his own land because it's private property." The lawyer shuffled his papers. "Your Honor, the HOA's intention was to preserve the aesthetic character of the neighborhood, not to enable commercial exploitation." Then perhaps the HOA should have thought more carefully before attempting to claim someone else's land, Judge Sullivan replied. "I'm reviewing the documentation submitted by the defendant, and I see proper zoning approval, business licenses, liability insurance, and compliance with all relevant city ordinances. What I don't see is any legal basis for the HOA's claim to control this property." Patricia stood up suddenly. "Your Honor, this is about community standards and maintaining the quality of our neighborhood. This orchard was a quiet, peaceful space, and now it's turned into a circus with strangers coming and going all day." "Mrs. Hendricks, please sit down," the judge said tiredly. "You're not addressing the court properly, and your personal feelings about your neighbor's business are not relevant to the legal question at hand." Patricia remained standing. "We have the right to control what happens in our community. The bylaws give us authority over land use." "Your bylaws don't supersede property law, city zoning regulations, or basic constitutional rights," Judge Sullivan said, her voice sharpening. "You cannot simply declare someone's private property to be communal and then complain when they exercise their legal rights as property owners." This is among the most frivolous cases I've seen in my courtroom. She ruled in my favor, granting the temporary restraining order that prohibited the HOA from fining me or interfering with my business operations. She also ordered the HOA to refund all fines they had already assessed, which totaled nearly $7,000 at that point. Patricia looked like she might spontaneously combust. Outside the courthouse, Rebecca shook my hand with a grin. That went even better than expected. Judge Sullivan does not have much patience for HOA overreach. I've been before her on similar cases. Is this over? I asked, hopeful but skeptical. For now. They could appeal, but based on Judge Sullivan's ruling, I doubt they'd succeed. They might try other tactics, though. Stay vigilant. I returned to the orchard feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Danny had managed things well in my absence, and we had a good crowd for a Thursday afternoon. I spent the rest of the day helping visitors, answering questions about the different apple varieties, and enjoying the satisfaction of work I actually cared about. But Rebecca was right to warn me. Patricia was not done. 2 weeks later, the county health department showed up for an inspection. Apparently, someone had filed a complaint about food safety violations at my cider stand. The inspector was professional and thorough, checking everything from my hand-washing station to my refrigeration units to my preparation surfaces. "Everything looks good," he said finally, marking items off on his checklist. "You're well above the minimum requirements for a small-scale food service operation. Whoever filed the complaint either had outdated information or was making things up." "Let me guess," I said. "The complaint was anonymous," he smiled slightly. "I can't comment on that, but let's just say this wasn't the first frivolous complaint I've investigated in this neighborhood recently." The fire marshal came next, supposedly responding to concerns about crowd safety and emergency access. He walked the property, examined my clearly marked exits, checked my fire extinguishers, and gave me a clean report. Then it was animal control, following up on reports of aggressive dogs on the property. I did not own any dogs. The officer laughed when I explained the situation and told me he had received 3 separate complaints about my non-existent pets. "Someone really has it out for you," he observed. "The HOA president," I confirmed. "She's not taking the court ruling well." "Yeah, we get that sometimes. People who can't win legally try to win through harassment. Document everything, and if it continues, you might have grounds for a restraining order." I took his advice seriously and started keeping a detailed log of every inspection, every HOA drive-by, every certified letter. Patricia and her committee members drove past the orchard multiple times a day, often slowing down to take photos or videos. It was creepy and unsettling, but I made sure to document it all. October brought cooler weather and even larger crowds. Fall harvest season was prime time for orchards, and I added pumpkins and gourds to the experience. I hosted a small harvest festival on the first weekend of the month, complete with live folk music, cider tastings, and children's activities. Over 500 people attended across the 2 days, and the local news covered it. That success seemed to push Patricia over some invisible edge. The following Monday, I arrived at the orchard to find that someone had spray-painted "Private Property Keep Out" across my entrance sign in harsh red letters. The security camera I had installed after the inspection started caught everything. The footage showed Patricia and Deborah arriving at 2 in the morning, parking down the street, and walking up to my property with spray paint and flashlights. They spent several minutes vandalizing the sign before hurrying back to Patricia's Mercedes and driving away. I called the police immediately and provided the video evidence. 2 officers came to take the report, and when they saw the footage, their demeanor shifted from routine paperwork to genuine interest. "That's pretty clear footage," one officer said. "You can identify them easily." "You want to press charges?" "Absolutely," I said without hesitation. "This has been going on for months. I've tried to handle it legally and professionally, but this is criminal vandalism." "Do you know these women?" the other officer asked. Patricia Hendricks is the HOA president. She's been harassing me since August. The other woman, Deborah Chen, is supposedly their legal counsel. The officers exchanged looks. We'll need you to come down to the station and make a formal statement. We'll take the video evidence and move forward with charges. I spent 3 hours at the police station that afternoon, going through everything from the beginning. The detective assigned to the case, a patient man named Detective Rodriguez, listened to the whole story and reviewed all my documentation. HOA disputes usually stay civil, he said. When they cross into criminal behavior, that's when we get involved. The vandalism is clear-cut. We'll bring them in for questioning. Patricia was arrested the next day at her home. Deborah was picked up at her office. Both were charged with misdemeanor vandalism and released on bail. The arrest became immediate news in the neighborhood. People were shocked, though many told me privately they were not surprised. The HOA held an emergency meeting that I did not attend, but Tom went and reported back. Apparently, there was a motion to remove Patricia from her position as president. It passed with 80% of the vote. Deborah resigned as legal counsel immediately, citing professional conflicts. A new HOA board was elected within a week, headed by a reasonable retired teacher named Margaret Liu, who immediately reached out to apologize for the previous board's behavior. Most of us had no idea how extreme Patricia had become, she told me over coffee at a local cafe. We thought she was just enthusiastic about neighborhood standards. We didn't realize she was harassing residents and making up rules. I appreciate the apology, I said. But I need assurance this won't happen again. We're completely rewriting the bylaws, Margaret assured me. Everything will be clearer, more reasonable, and most importantly, we're adding protections against this kind of overreach. Your property is yours, we have no claim to it, and we never did. The criminal case against Patricia and Deborah moved through the system over the following months. In December, they both accepted plea deals that included restitution for the damaged sign, community service, and probation. Patricia was ordered to attend anger management counseling. Deborah faced professional review by the state bar, though I did not follow that process closely. The orchard remained successful through the fall and into winter. I expanded the offerings with a small Christmas tree section and winter vegetable sales. The business had become genuinely profitable, enough that I was considering hiring additional help for the next season. In February, Margaret and the new HOA board invited me to a neighborhood meeting to discuss community relations. I was hesitant, but decided to attend. The meeting was held at the local library, and about 40 residents showed up. Margaret opened by acknowledging the previous year's problems and outlining the changes the new board had implemented. Then she turned to me. "We want to make things right," she said. "We're hoping you might consider offering a neighborhood resident discount at the orchard, not as an obligation but as a gesture of community partnership." I thought about it for a moment. I can do that. 20% off admission for anyone who lives in the HOA boundaries. And 1 free family pass per household annually. There was applause, which felt surreal after months of conflict. Several people came up afterward to thank me and apologize for not standing up to Patricia sooner. Tom clapped me on the shoulder. "You handled all this better than most people would have. You could have backed down or gotten nasty, but you just kept doing things the right way." "I just wanted to work in my orchard," I said honestly. "All of this was forced on me." "Sometimes standing your ground is the hardest thing to do," Tom replied. "But you did it, and now the whole neighborhood is better for it." Spring came with new growth in the orchard and renewed energy for the business. I hired 2 part-time employees, both local college students who were excited about sustainable agriculture. I added educational workshops about pruning, grafting, and organic pest management. Schools started booking field trips. The orchard had become more than I originally envisioned, but in a good way. It was a genuine community resource, except now it was on my terms and legally operated. People came to learn, to pick fresh fruit, to let their children experience something beyond screens and suburban monotony. In April, I received an unexpected letter from Patricia. It was handwritten, not typed on official HOA letterhead. "I am writing to apologize," it began. "My behavior last year was inexcusable. I let my need for control and my ideas about how things should be override common sense and basic decency. I convinced myself I was acting in the community's best interest when I was really just trying to impose my will on others. The arrest and its consequences have given me time to reflect on my actions. I am genuinely sorry for the stress and expense I caused you. I hope you can forgive me, though I would understand if you cannot." I read the letter several times, looking for insincerity or hidden agenda. It seemed genuine. People could change, I supposed, especially after facing real consequences for their actions. I wrote back a brief note. "I accept your apology. I hope you found some peace." I meant it. Carrying anger was exhausting, and Patricia was no longer a threat. The legal system had worked, the community had corrected course, and life had moved forward. Summer brought record crowds to the orchard. I was profiled in a regional agricultural magazine as an example of successful urban farming and agritourism. Other small farms reached out for advice on business models and dealing with local regulations. I had accidentally become an advocate for property rights and reasonable HOA governance. In July, I stood in the same spot where Patricia had first confronted me almost a year earlier. The orchard was thriving, the trees heavy with ripening fruit. Families wandered the rows, children laughed as they discovered ripe peaches, and the air smelled like summer and growth and possibility. Danny was managing the ticket booth, efficiently handling a small line of visitors. Tom and his wife were volunteering at the cider stand, enjoying being part of something that brought the community together in a positive way. Margaret had even arranged for a percentage of the orchard's profits to go toward maintaining actual public spaces in the neighborhood, creating a genuine partnership. My phone rang. It was Rebecca, calling with news that the HOA had officially withdrawn all previous bylaws related to private property designation and had sent a formal legal document acknowledging my complete ownership and rights to operate my business without interference. "It's done," she said. "Completely, officially, legally done. They can't bother you again without facing serious legal consequences. Thank you for everything," I told her. "I couldn't have navigated this without you." "You did the hard part," she replied. "You stood up for yourself and didn't back down when it would have been easier to give in. That takes real courage." After hanging up, I walked through the orchard one more time, checking the irrigation, noting which trees would need attention, planning for the harvest season. This land, these trees, this business I had built from nothing but work and determination felt more mine than ever. The fence that I had installed as an act of defiance had become something else entirely. It was not a barrier anymore. It was a threshold, a gateway into something I had created. People crossed through that gate willingly, eagerly, paying for the privilege of experiencing something real and growing. Patricia had tried to take this from me, to claim authority over something she had no right to control. In fighting back, I had not just defended my property. I had built something better than I originally planned. The orchard was more productive, more profitable, and more meaningful than it would have been as just my private garden. Sometimes the universe worked in strange ways. An attempt to diminish my rights had instead forced me to fully realize the potential of what I owned. Every tree, every visitor, every dollar earned was proof that standing your ground mattered. As the sun began to set over the orchard, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, I locked the gate for the evening and headed back to my house. Tomorrow would bring more visitors, more work, more of the satisfaction that came from building something with your own hands and defending it with your own will. The HOA no longer controlled anything about my life beyond the basics of neighborhood appearance standards. and even those were now reasonable and fairly applied. My orchard stood as a testament to what happened when someone pushed back against unreasonable authority with patience, persistence, and the law on their side in the end. Patricia had been right about one thing: the orchard had become community space, just not the way she imagined. It was space where the community came together by choice, where they paid for value received, where they learned and grew and connected with something authentic. That was worth far more than any forced designation could ever achieve. I sat on my porch with a cold beer, the same spot where I had first conceived the plan to fence the orchard and charge admission. What had started as malicious compliance had evolved into something I was genuinely proud of. The irony was not lost on me. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. "Just wanted to say thanks again for working with the new board. You've set a great example of how to handle conflict constructively. The neighborhood is lucky to have you." I smiled and texted back my thanks. A year ago, I would not have believed this outcome was possible. A year ago, I was just a guy who wanted to grow fruit and be left alone. Now I was a guy who grew fruit, ran a successful business, had stood up to bullying disguised as authority, and had somehow ended up as a community leader despite my best efforts to avoid such things. The orchard would continue to grow and thrive. The business would expand. New challenges would inevitably arise, because that was life. But I had learned something valuable through this entire ordeal. When you stand on solid ground, both literally and figuratively, it is very hard for anyone to push you off it. As darkness settled over Riverside and the stars began to appear above my 2 acres of carefully tended trees, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Not just satisfaction or relief or vindication, though I felt all of those things. What I felt was belonging. This was my land, my work, my contribution to the place I lived. No one could take that from me or diminish it with petty power plays and invented rules. The orchard was mine, legally, morally, and absolutely. And in being fully mine, it had become something the whole community could enjoy and value. Patricia had demanded control and lost everything. I had defended what was mine and gained more than I expected. That seemed like the right way for the story to end, with justice served and lessons learned. The beer was cold, the evening was peaceful, and tomorrow would bring another day of good work in the place I had fought to protect. Sometimes life worked out exactly as it should, even when it took a winding path to get there. I raised my bottle in a silent toast to my orchard, my fence, my absurdly successful malicious compliance, and to the simple truth that had carried me through the whole ordeal. Never let anyone tell you they control what is rightfully yours. Stand your ground, use the law, document everything, and refuse to back down. It was a good lesson, hard-earned but worth it. And as I finished my beer and headed inside to plan the next day's harvest, I knew with absolute certainty that I would apply that lesson to every challenge that came my way from now on. The orchard was safe. The business was thriving. The community had been transformed. And I had learned exactly how strong I could be when circumstances demanded it. That was worth more than any amount of easy peace. That was worth fighting for, and I had won.